That would probably be the worst. You go through this, and then in 5 years you realize you put somebody in who was no better. So we'd like to see somebody in there that's going to bring it back for the people.
Your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, to your point about, this kind of fifth grade level understanding, or someone who just read like the Spark Notes. I mean, there's been a lot of reporting over the years how Trump doesn't really take his intelligence assessments seriously, or the assessments from the actual military. Even in this favorable circumstance for the U.S., or maybe sometime down the road, they're able to neuter the missile capabilities, that the drone capabilities, they can just launch them off pickup truck and they don't leave any signature. They can't really easily be shot down or detected either. So it's a quagmire. It really is a quagmire.
You can help build the only independent news outlet, always on the ground with the people, for as low as 16 cents a day.
Corporate media, they've been lying to us for years, and you're going straight to the people.
Flint, Michigan,
Washington, D.C.
Brooklyn, New York.
Government sending one more you to the residents of Chicago.
We need as many independent voices as possible, and that's why what you guys do is so important.
Covering what the corporate media covers up.
Hey, it's Jordan. Delighted to be joined by Sina Toossi. You're a senior non-resident fellow at the Center for International Policy and write a lot on U.S.-Iran relations, Iranian politics, and nuclear non-proliferation. Obviously, major time to talk right now as we speak. It is a full-blown regional conflict. Let me start with Rubio's comments yesterday, which seemed to be, if Israel is going to attack Iran or any country, we need to then launch a war on behalf of Israel.
The second question that's been asked is, why now? Well, there's two reasons why now. The first is it was abundantly clear that if Iran came under attack by anyone, the United States or Israel or anyone, they were going to respond and respond against the United States. The orders had been delegated down to the field commanders. It was automatic, and in fact, it bared to be true, because in fact, within an hour of the initial attack on the leadership compound, the missile forces in the south and in the north, for that matter, had already been activated to launch. In fact, those had already been pre-positioned. The third is the assessment that was made that if we stood and waited for that attack to come first before we hit them, we would suffer much higher casualties. And so the president made the very wise decision. We knew that there was going to be an Israeli action. We knew that that would precipitate an attack against American forces. And we knew that if we didn't preemptively go after them before they launched those attacks, we would suffer higher casualties and perhaps even higher those killed. And then we would all be here answering questions about why we knew that and didn't act. Going back.
Which one is it? Israel was going to go ahead without us, or they were trying to convince us to do it?
Yeah, it's kind of all over the place, really, like their justification for this war, which I think is evidence of how sideways this is going, and how poorly thought out this was. But I mean, Rubio's comments were extremely striking, because I mean, he's basically shifting the blame onto Israel, or I mean, this idea that Israel was going to attack and we were going to get drawn in anyway, so we just decided to join in the attack, is total nonsense. I mean, the U.S. is the great power in this relationship between the U.S. and Israel. Israel's the junior partner, and the U.S. is not in a position, nor should it be, to be dragged into a war that, this junior partner wants. And, actually in the Obama era and in the Biden era, that support, it was made clear to the Israelis that America would not support a war against Iran. And so they did not launch a war against Iran, the Israelis. And because, even if Israel, last June when Israel attacked Iran in the middle of negotiations as well, then that ultimately the U.S. was also dragged into that conflict. At that point, it was just a kind of one and done strike on nuclear facilities. But even then, what America has done is provide Israel with a lot of the defensive support. The support that America gives Israel is not just the offensive support and all the military armaments, but also in the case of these conflicts with Iran, is to kind of have these ships there and have these missile batteries there that can intercept these Iranian missiles. So, there's leverage that America had over Israel to stop this, to not have this catastrophic war. There was a strong deal at the table. This deal that, by all accounts, was on the table last week, according to the foreign minister of Oman, who's the mediator. this was a strong deal. It was a strong nuclear non-proliferation deal that was stronger than what Obama got. And yet we've still chosen to enter this war. Trump has entered this war, and it's going terribly. I think it's going not how they expected it to go. And I can get into why, but it's turning out to be a quagmire, really.
You know, when I listened to Trump, and I'm going to play some other clips from today, it's almost like the fifth grader who didn't read the book, but read the cliff notes. And when the teacher calls on him to kind of, what was your favorite part? He's just, him or her student are hemming and hawing because they didn't read the book. I mean, it's clear he didn't think any of this through. I'll play another clip here.
Commercial air travel right now is severely restricted in the Middle East, and thousands of Americans are stranded. Why wasn't there an evacuation plan, and will you send planes to get people out?
Well, because it happened all very quickly. We thought, and I thought maybe more so than most, I could ask Marco, but I thought we were going to have a situation where we were going to be attacked. They were getting ready to attack Israel. They were getting ready to attack others. You're seeing that right now. And a lot of those missiles that are hitting in, those are stationary. Those were aimed there for a long period of time at these other countries. So I think I was right about that. We attacked first. And if we didn't, it could have been, look, we're really decimating them. They're being decimated.
So he says it all happened very quickly, despite the fact that there was, at least weeks, but we believe months of buildup and preparation for this. So this did not happen very quickly. This was premeditated by the U.S. and Israel. He was also asked, what's the worst case scenario? Here's his hard to understand answer.
Yeah, please.
Mr. President, what's the worst case scenario that you have planned for in Iran?
Well, I don't know if there's a worst case. We have them very much beaten militarily from the military standpoint. They're still lobbing some missiles. At some point, they won't even be able to do that because we're hitting all of their carriers. We're hitting all of their missile stock. They built up all these missiles over the last few years. They had a lot of them. They've shot a lot of them, and we're knocking out a lot. I guess the worst case would be we do this, and then somebody takes over who's as bad as the previous person, right? That could happen. We don't want that to happen. It would probably be the worst. You go through this, and then in 5 years you realize you put somebody in who was no better. So we'd like to see somebody in there that's going to bring it back for the people.
Your thoughts?
Yeah, to your point about, this kind of fifth grade level understanding, or someone who just read like the Spark Notes. There's been a lot of reporting over the years how Trump doesn't really take his intelligence assessments seriously, or the assessments from the actual military. And we've had reporting to this end in the lead up to this war too, that this war was a war within Iran really had no good military options. Depending on what the goal is, whether that be destroying the military, the kind of nuclear program, the missile program, or having regime change, there's really no good military options for that. And I can explain why more later. But, Trump deciding to launch this war, to me, is an irrational act. I've seen some people argue that, Iran's deterrence failed, and that's why they attacked. Iran actually proved that it can hit back hard in both in the June war, both in the 2024 kind of missile exchanges with Israel. They hit strategic sites in Israel. They hit U.S. military base last June. And so, they've ever since 2018, when Trump has been on this kind of maximum pressure campaign against Iran, they've taken efforts to hinder the flow of energy from the Persian Gulf successfully. So they've proven these capabilities. And it was always clear that launching this kind of, putting Iran in a corner like this, in this existential war, they're going to push, hit back hard to, go up on the escalation ladder and try to create leverage for themselves to get a ceasefire and get a more favorable diplomatic settlement. That's what the Iranians are doing right now. But Trump, I think, we had all this reporting last week from about citing kind of the Pentagon and the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, just before this war, how they were saying that this is, we're kind of not prepared for this in many ways. This is going to drain our, stockpile of interceptor missiles to intercept these ballistic missiles from Iran that are very strategic stockpile that are very hard and expensive to replenish. And, in this New York Times report from yesterday that apparently a lot of the intelligence reports were also to this end, that this isn't a good idea. But I think Trump, he cares more about the political optics of everything and how he can manipulate the political optics of things, like regardless of the reality of it. Even in this favorable circumstance for the U.S., or maybe sometime down the road, they're able to neuter the missile capabilities, that the drone capabilities, they can just launch them off a pickup truck. Right. And they don't leave any signature. And they can hit targets, strategic targets. They can hit them accurately with heavy payload. They can take out oil facilities, target oil tankers. And they can't really easily be shot down or detected either. So it's a quagmire. It really is a quagmire.
And, obviously it's probably above your pay grade to get inside Trump's head. But, although he's a pretty gross, I believe, evil man, his political instincts, for the most part, have usually been in tune. I'm sure he knows that part of why he was elected was pushing that he's anti-war, America first, all that jazz. So when you say irrational, is it too cynical of me to believe that possibly because he never served, doesn't read intelligence briefings, some reports say they had to present it to him almost in pictures, some of his intelligence briefings, that he wrongly assumed, Venezuela, we just kidnapped Maduro. This will be slam bam, maybe a few days. I'll declare victory and Iran will, surrender at its knees. And because he thought that, maybe because of some of the other things going on, Epstein and other things, he just said, let me change the news cycle. I mean, it's speculation, but is that kind of ignorant thinking in terms of what this would really entail? Did he potentially wrongly knee-jerk say, this will be quick?
Yeah, I mean, I think he has. I think this is a big mistake. And it is, because his whole approach to military intervention abroad up until now has been kind of short actions, kind of basically one-off actions that he can make a big political spectacle out of it. Like, I kidnapped Maduro. I bombed all these ISIS sites in Syria. I, killed Soleimani, but kind of one and done. And that he's able to frame politically in an advantageous way, portray himself as a tough man, but this is different. This is an open-ended war, a regional war, and with consequences that can directly impact every American in terms of the price of gasoline, which is obviously going to affect the price of everything else, and the stock market. And these are already all going in the wrong direction for Trump.
Right.
And I think, the thing with the Strait of Hormuz that Iran is blocking right now, which I think if it wants, it can block for a long time. Again, with these drones and other capabilities, I mean, it's right there. It's part of Iran. Is that the longer they do it, the harm is kind of accumulating and snowballs and gets bigger. Politically for Trump, I mean, the Iran war last summer was kind of an inflection point amongst the MAGA base, where you saw after that war, just through my kind of casual assessment of the conservative movement and a lot of the media and the MAGA base, is that's when you had, Charlie Kirk was calling J.D. Vance, telling him don't get into a war with Iran. You had, Tucker Carlson and Candace Owens really pivot even more in an anti-war, anti-Israel direction. And now you're seeing, all those voices, like the Tuckers, the Candaces, whatever. But, like Megyn Kelly was critical of this yesterday. I was actually invited to the Bill O'Reilly program last week before the war. And Bill O'Reilly was against it. And he said he had a conversation with Trump and told him to get a deal. So, yeah, I mean, no one's really wanted. I mean, Trump, nobody, the MAGA base didn't vote for him to get him big Middle Eastern wars again. That was what they voted for him not to do. Right. And he said he wouldn't do. So it's just, the political calculation is very odd, and it's very, I think, Trump, I mean, the thing that makes the, it fits the bill that he didn't think it was going to go this way. They didn't think, I mean, he said, we didn't think that Iran would hit the other countries in the Persian Gulf. I'm like, this was always Iran's strategy. They literally changed their military doctrine in recent weeks to say they were going to hit back in a big way in the region. They sent letters to the United Nations I mean, Iran was basically trying to deter this from happening. Yeah.
Well, of course it's speculation, but if Trump is an expert at one thing, it is media manipulation. I mean, he got $4 or $5 billion of free airtime in 2016 to get elected. And he knows, particularly these legacy cable news outlets, they can't resist war. It's good for their ratings. So to me, I mean, he perhaps surprisingly kind of pulled back at least the worst of his ICE troops. Looking at the polling, we were on the ground in Minneapolis for 2 months as they were, basically invading and terrorizing immigrants, citizens, veterans. And then the Epstein thing, which I would argue the media was finally doing some actual good investigative reporting on. Independent journalists and then legacy media confirmed that the DOJ was hiding documents from one particular accuser. And then all of a sudden you get all these reports about buildup, and they're taking the U.S. Gerald Ford from Venezuela to the border of Iran. And then you have this. So it seems to me, if this is a simple-minded person who doesn't understand geopolitics and just wants to be a strongman, he has a lot of pressure on him here in the United States, including a scandal, and knew that this could change the subject.
That's true. And that very well may have been part of the calculation. Like, that's very plausible to me. The only thing is that I think, a war with Iran also entails political cost. And maybe he thought that political cost could be mitigated, or again, like he apparently thought Iran wouldn't hit back in the Persian Gulf the way it is. So maybe he thinks he could, just diminish this war from escalating further. But for now, it's already having a visible cost on the global economy. And I don't think there's any easy way out. Maybe he's going to try to walk back. I mean, Trump is also the master, threatening fire and fury and then just backing down.
Right.
And then just selling a narrative that makes him try to look tough, and his base will eat it up regardless. So
we killed the Ayatollah. We killed the Ayatollah mission.
Yeah, we killed the Ayatollah, which that wasn't, he was above ground. Arguably, it seems like he actually, for various factors having to do with the government's ideology in Iran, he wasn't in a bunker. I mean, he was above ground in his residence with his family when he was killed in the opening blows. And regardless, he'll just twist some narrative. Like, he's been saying, we destroyed their navy. I'm like, no one even thought of Iran as a naval power to do anything, Right. Iran's military capabilities weren't like the 6 ships it had, military ships. This is a country that's been under severe sanctions for decades, is isolated, but it still managed to build up this pretty formidable ballistic missile and drone capability that is the key means of its deterrence.
That was my actual next question. The media only looks at or considers it war when you start dropping bombs, but America has actually been at war with Iran forever. We've been economically committing war on them with these crippling sanctions. You're an expert on, Iranian politics as well. Can you talk about the effect of the sanctions? Obviously, I would think the majority of Iranian citizens were against this regime, but they do, of course, have true believers and supporters. But people have been hurting economically there for a long time. So this war is already on top of a struggling country.
Yeah, I think when you really look at Iran's modern history, much like many countries in the global south, like countries that have been of Asia, of Africa, of Latin America, the formerly colonized world, Iran in the past 2 centuries, it is this country that isn't, has a rich civilization, rich culture, rich history. But in the past several centuries, it came under, foreign domination from the Russians and British starting in the 1800s, and then Americans after the 1953 coup, where you had a prime minister in Iran who nationalized the oil industry and away from the British, and was owned by BP, British Petroleum, and which at the time was called Anglo-Iranian Oil Company. And then anyway, so the U.S. did a coup d'etat and overthrew Mohammad Mossadegh and installed the Shah as its kind of U.S.-backed dictator there. And he ruled until this 1979 revolution that was a popular revolution, but that ultimately the faction that emerged as victorious and took power from this revolution was the Ayatollah Khomeini. And, his ideas, which are actually very heterodox in terms of Shia theology and Shia religion, but I'm not going to get into that. But regardless, he created this idea of this Islamic Republic, a blend of his kind of theological ideas and kind of traditional Republican ideas. So that's why Iran has like a parliament, but it also has like a guardian council that vets people that's like half clerics. And it has like a president, but it also has this velayat faqih, who's this, we call him supreme leader in American English, which is that was Khamenei, and he was just assassinated. As of 2003, according to the U.S. intelligence community, there was some weaponization research in regards to this nuclear program, but that ended in 2003. Since then, we've had this whole nuclear crisis with Iran, that Iran, is accused of trying to build nuclear weapons. And so when it comes to the actual technical details of the Iranian nuclear program, since 2003, there's no evidence that they've tried to weaponize it or go in the direction of nuclear weapons. But they have built an expansive nuclear program and kind of built their own indigenous, they've mastered the whole nuclear fuel cycle to be able to, basically go from like mining, getting the uranium to going to producing their own nuclear fuel to have for reactors and for other uses. But, nuclear technology is obviously a dual use technology. It could be used for weapons. And so this has always posed a proliferation risk for the United States and its allies. But with that said, there's been so much alarmism about it too, because Iran has never gone to weapons grade uranium. It's always had the option to do so, but it's never done so. So it's never had an active
also
nuclear.
if you have a gazillion U.S. bases encroaching closer and closer to you,
exactly.
Wouldn't you want if you're Iran? Wouldn't you want some type of leverage or?
Which, and it confounds many that, Iran ultimately never made that decision to build a nuclear weapon, even after the June war, so the nuclear weapon for them really became, I think they thought that having that the kind of threshold capacity is what they call it. Like when you don't have a nuke, but you can build one in short time if you made the decision to do so, that would give them some kind of deterrence. That obviously didn't. But what they ultimately used their nuclear program for was a bargaining chip. To get sanctions relief, because Iran has been under these draconian, this economic warfare, just like Cuba, just like Venezuela was, aimed at, destroying really disintegrating the country, destroying the middle class, creating these destructive conditions, and getting, even in recent, like we've had these protests in Iran in January where in the middle of them, the Treasury Secretary Besant was like, "Oh, this is our policy working. Our sanctions are working. The people are taking to the streets." The idea is to impoverish the people, get them angry, and basically create, riots and unrest, and just lay the grounds for even, broader escalation. So, it's a playbook that, was used, for example, in Iraq as well after the 1999 Gulf War. But now we're in this war and we're in this quagmire, and like regime change, you can't do regime change from air. After the death of Khamenei, the Islamic Republic has mobilized its base. Its base has, I would argue, shrunk over the years and decades, but it still has a base. It's not like where Saddam Hussein was in 2003 or even where the Shah was in 1979. It still has, let's say, I don't know, like the hardline presidential candidate in last 2 years ago got about like 13 million votes. So let's say, maybe like 15 million people are like the base of the Islamic Republic. That's a lot of people still in a country of 90 million. Like, there's widespread discontent and anger, and these protest movements are very genuine, despite the U.S. and them trying to exploit them. But it's just Iran can just as easily head in the direction of like civil war and chaos, like ultimately has happened with Libya or Syria for the past 15 years, or Yemen. This is something we've seen repeated throughout this region.
Right.
So that's one scenario for Iran. But the idea that they can come in and do some kind of clean regime change from bombing campaigns and trigger some uprising, that has not happened. And that continues to be, I would say, basically impossible.
And my last question, politicians in both parties don't tend to be long-term thinkers. But, something I'm seeing is, this has the potential for something much worse than the creation of ISIS. And shockingly, I hate to use her because I'm not really a big buyer into her political evolution, but Marjorie Taylor Greene, of all people, I think said this really well. She just basically said, we're about to radicalize a whole new generation. Let me play it.
We're bombing them. We are bombing them and killing their people and destroying their buildings and wreaking havoc on their entire ability to function in daily life. Do we really think these people are going to be saying, oh, thank you, America. Thank you. God bless you. We're killing them and killing their children. So I think we're radicalizing a whole new generation of Iranians.
That's what I worry about too.
I mean, obviously ISIS was created after a much longer war. I also don't think this is just going to be a few weeks like Trump predicted. I think it could be longer than that. But what are your thoughts? Because I'm already seeing, videos, death to America, people chanting that in other Mideast countries.
Definitely, it's like the just basic cause and effect that I feel like we forget about in this country. It's like, if you go, there's blowback from our policies, and so with the radicalization that's happening, that is very apparent, she's definitely right about that. I would just add the kind of nuance that Iranian society is, again, very polarized. And so given the deep-seated discontent that, millions of Iranians also have against the Islamic Republic, many people are genuinely just hoping that, the situation is crappy, the government has been bad, and they want a better future. And America, or like Reza Pahlavi, the son of the former dictator, the son of the Shah, they're saying they can bring something better. And, for someone who's desperate, who's lost their job, who has nothing, they're just wanting something better. So my point is that it's not necessarily black and white. There are Iranians who aren't going, they're hoping that this just leads to something better. But for many, many other millions of Iranians in this fractured society, in this polarized society, amongst the base of the government, and I think, beyond that, many ordinary people who are now seeing their homes bombed, this school that was bombed, and all these, the funeral for these girls that were killed at that school in Iran. Today, it seemed to me like tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, based off the videos that came out. So you're going to see that. You're going to definitely see that radicalization more. And you also see this radicalization beyond Iran is spread out. Their missiles are spread out. Their political structures are spread out. Every official has identified like multiple successors for themselves. The process has begun for the next supreme leader selection. There's this council right now. So that blowback is like, what is the end game here? The U.S. has no real good options. So Trump is just going to try to escalate more. Like how so? Like ground troops? Like that risk of mission creep and this becoming an even bigger quagmire is huge. The Persian Gulf, the Strait of Hormuz is closed. Hezbollah in Lebanon got involved yesterday. The various groups in Iraq are active right now. They're targeting, U.S. interests there. And, the Houthis in Yemen said today that they might enter and they can close the Bab al-Mandab Strait in the Red Sea. So this is, the blowback is very evident. The lack of strategic foresight is very evident from the U.S. side. And, the people who are paying the biggest price, sadly, though, are the Iranian people who've been suffering already under the sanctions, under, a bad government, a repressive government, and now this war that has been unleashed upon them.
And, we don't have time for it, but let's point out, we kind of started this back in 1953.
Exactly.
Toppling their democratically elected leader, Mossadegh, which then created this, 70-year domino effect. I mean, at the end of the day, we are the empire in this equation. America is the great power. America is, with the $1 trillion defense budget. And these are, so it's not like to cast these kind of mid-tier powers that are fledgling, been under our economic warfare for decades as being the big evil boogeyman is obviously just a caricature and not reflective of reality. Thank you, Sina Toossi. You are a non-resident fellow at the Center for International Policy and focus on U.S.-Iran relations. Appreciate it. Let's keep in touch.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.